The cemetery was silent except for the soft rustle of autumn leaves dancing across the weathered gravestones. Margaret knelt before a marble headstone, her worn hands trembling as she placed a small bouquet of daisies, the cheapest flowers she could afford, beside the engraved name, Elena Hartwell, beloved daughter, 1990-2023. Tears streamed down her weathered face as she whispered, "I'm so sorry I couldn't save you, my angel. I tried. God knows I tried." Her voice cracked with a grief so profound it seemed to echo through the emptiness around her. She didn't notice the expensive black sedan pulling up to the cemetery gates, nor did she hear the footsteps approaching behind her until a deep, masculine voice shattered her solitude. "That's my wife's grave, too." If this story has already touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment below sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to Kindness Pulse for more stories that celebrate the power of compassion and human connection. Your support means the world to us. Margaret's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock and confusion. Standing before her was a man who seemed to belong to a different world entirely. Tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, with salt and pepper hair and eyes that carried the weight of unspeakable sorrow. This was Alexander Hartwell, CEO of Hartwell Industries, one of the most powerful men in the city. But right now, stripped of all pretense by the rawness of his grief, he looked just like her, broken, lost, and desperately clinging to the memory of someone irreplaceable. I don't understand," Margaret stammered, rising shakily to her feet. Her clothes were threadbare, her shoes held together with tape, and she felt suddenly conscious of the vast chasm between their worlds. "Elena was my daughter. She was my everything." Alexander's expression softened and he took a careful step closer. "Elena was my wife," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "We were married for 2 years, the happiest 2 years of my life." He paused, swallowing hard. "I come here every week. I've seen you here before, always from a distance, but I never knew you were her mother." Margaret's legs nearly gave out beneath her. Elena had never told her she'd gotten married. In fact, Elena had cut off all contact with Margaret 3 years ago, after a devastating argument that Margaret replayed in her mind every single day. Margaret had been struggling with alcohol addiction back then, drowning in the depression that came from years of poverty and loss. Elena had begged her mother to get help, to fight for herself, to be the mother she needed. But Margaret had been too proud, too ashamed, too convinced she was beyond saving. Elena had left with tears streaming down her face, saying she couldn't watch her mother destroy herself anymore. "She never told me," Margaret whispered, her voice barely audible. "We weren't speaking when she—" The words caught in her throat. The guilt was a living thing inside her, gnawing at her soul day and night. She had only learned of Elena's death from a former neighbor who'd seen the obituary. By then the funeral was over, and Margaret had been left with nothing but regret and the crushing weight of all the words left unsaid. Alexander studied her face, seeing the genuine anguish there. "She spoke of you," he said softly. "She told me about your struggles, about the pain you both carried. But she also told me about the woman you used to be, the mother who sang to her every night, who made fairy tale castles out of cardboard boxes because you couldn't afford toys. She never stopped loving you. And I never stopped loving her either," Margaret said, wiping her eyes. I was broken. I didn't know how to be what she needed." "Neither did I," Alexander admitted. And for the first time, Margaret saw the cracks in his polished exterior. "I was so consumed with building my empire that I didn't see the signs. Elena had been feeling sick for months, but she kept brushing it off, and I was too busy to insist she see a doctor. By the time we caught the cancer, it was stage 4. I had all the money in the world, the best doctors, but none of it mattered. I couldn't save her either." They stood in silence, 2 broken souls united by love for the same extraordinary woman. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cemetery, and somewhere in the distance a bird sang a mournful melody. "Why do you come here?" Alexander asked gently. "You can barely afford those flowers, can you?" Margaret shook her head, shame coloring her cheeks. "I live in a shelter now. I've been sober for a year since I learned about Elena. It was the wake-up call I needed, though it came too late. I clean houses when I can find work, and I save whatever I can to buy her flowers. It's the only way I can still show her I love her." Alexander's eyes glistened with unshed tears, She would be proud of you, he said. That year of sobriety, that's not nothing. That's everything. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. I want to offer you something. Not charity, but an opportunity. I'm establishing the Elena Hartwell Memorial Foundation, a non-profit to help families struggling with addiction. You understand this battle from the inside. You could help save others even if we couldn't save her in time. Margaret stared at the card in disbelief. Why would you trust me? I failed her. We both failed her, Alexander corrected gently. But failure doesn't have to be the end of our story. Elena believed in second chances. She believed in redemption. Let's honor her memory by living the values she held dear. Margaret began to sob then, great heaving cries that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. Alexander stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her in a compassionate embrace. They stood there, two strangers bound by love and loss, finding unexpected comfort in shared grief. Before we reach the beautiful conclusion, I want to remind you to hit that like button and subscribe to Kindness Pulse. We share stories like this every week that remind us of our shared humanity. Ring that notification bell so you never miss a story that could change your perspective. Over the following months, Margaret threw herself into the foundation's work with passion and dedication. She met with families torn apart by addiction, sharing her story without shame, offering hope where there had been only despair. She created support groups and connected people with life-saving resources, and every single week, without fail, she and Alexander met at Elena's grave, bringing daisies and roses, sharing stories about the woman they'd both loved. Alexander watched Margaret transform before his eyes. The broken woman he'd met that day became a force of nature, channeling her pain into purpose. He made sure she had a modest apartment, a steady salary, and access to continued counseling. But more than that, he gave her family. They shared holidays together, both feeling less alone in their grief. 1 year later, on the anniversary of Elena's death, Margaret and Alexander stood before her grave once more. But this time they weren't alone. Behind them stood dozens of people, families who had found hope through the foundation, people whose lives had been saved by Margaret's work. They each placed a flower on Elena's grave, creating a rainbow of blooms. She's saving lives even now, Alexander said softly, his hand finding Margaret's. Through us, through the foundation, through every person here who found their way back from the darkness. Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her face, but this time they weren't only tears of grief. They were tears of gratitude, of purpose found, of redemption earned. I couldn't save her, she whispered, but maybe by saving others I can honor the love she showed me. We all deserve love, Alexander replied. We all deserve second chances. That's what Elena taught me. That's what you've taught me too. As the sun set over the cemetery, Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. She had lost her daughter, but in losing her, she had found herself again. And in the most unexpected way, she had found family in a grieving CEO who understood that the most valuable legacy we can leave is not measured in dollars, but in lives touched, in hope restored, in love that transcends even death itself. The greatest gifts we can give each other are second chances and the belief that our past doesn't define our future. Margaret and Alexander's story reminds us that healing often comes from the most unexpected places, and that shared grief can become the foundation for profound connection and purpose. May we all have the courage to transform our pain into compassion. Thank you for watching this story on Kindness Pulse, where every story is a reminder that kindness has the power to change everything.